Ja, es ist jetzt, weiß ich gar nicht. Ist das Donnerstag? Nee. Also, es ist jetzt mitten in der Nacht. Wir haben Freitag morgens 3:11 Uhr. Naja, so ungefähr 3 Uhr. Und irgendwie, man kommt gar nicht mehr zum Schlafen. Ich wollte gerade noch den neuesten Podcast hochladen mit den Bauern. Aber wir haben eine Eilmeldung. Und zwar könnt ihr euch noch darauf besinnen, wenn ihr es in den Nachrichten gesehen habt. Die haben ja immer die Schiffe da mit Drohnen angegriffen im Eingang zum Roten Meer oder im Roten Meer, so dass die ganzen Containerschiffe, Frachtschiffe mussten denn den langen Weg um das Kap der Guten Hoffnung, um Afrika zu machen, um nach Europa oder irgendwo anders hinzufahren. Und die internationale Gemeinschaft hatte ja auch Kriegsschiffe denn dahin entsendet, um dem zu begegnen. Und deswegen jetzt diese Eilmeldung. Sie haben sich das nicht mehr gefallen gelassen mit den Drohnenangriffen. Die amerikanischen, englischen und auch australische Kriegsschiffe haben heute Nacht angefangen, den Jemen zu bombardieren. Scheinbar finden auch Luftangriffe statt, um diese ganzen Houthi-Rebellen und sowas da zu bekämpfen. Also der Jemen wird definitiv zurzeit gerade aktuell massivst bombardiert und angegriffen. Das wird immer schlimmer. Wer weiß, wo das hier alles hinführt. Und das wird auch Auswirkungen wieder auf uns haben. Nur mal kurz die Eilmeldung, damit das keiner verpasst. Ich hoffe, ihr seid des Englischen ein bisschen mächtig und ich spiele mal ein, was da so in den Medien gewesen ist.
The US and UK have launched airstrikes on Houthi rebel bases in Yemen. We'll bring in Rob Scott in Canberra. Rob, we knew Australian forces were in the area, but we now know that they were involved in these strikes. Take us through it.
Yeah, that's right, Rob. We were waiting for confirmation from the Defence Minister's office about exactly what involvement those Australian forces had. But we have just received a statement from the White House confirming that Australia, as part of that multinational task force, has played a role in these strikes against the Houthis. As I say, exactly what that is, we're not certain yet, but most likely we help provide logistics, intelligence and other support services. So not direct military involvement, more of a supporting role for the US and UK. We know that Australia sent around 11 military personnel to the region last month to support that US-led international mission to protect those international shipping lanes. We're likely to get more of a clear picture from the Defence Department in the next couple of hours, outlining exactly what role we played. When we get that, we'll bring it to you.
It shows explosions in Hodeidah in western Yemen. We previously brought you a still of that. This moving images in the aftermath of that explosion, one of the strikes that's taken place this evening in Yemen. Well, let's return now to Simon Diggins, who I believe is still on the line, who's a British Defence Attaché in Kabul from 2008 to 2010. So what interrupted our interview there, Simon, that statement from President Biden, is it as you would expect?
Yes, it's a very full explanation of what the US and its allies are doing and why they've done it, laying out, I think, very reasonable grounds for some kind of military intervention, explaining the importance of the Bab al-Mandab, which is the entry point into the Red Sea, and the importance of that seaway to international trade. The figures are challenged sometimes, but between 12 and 15% all global trade moves through the Red Sea from there, and particularly important in terms of oil supplies into Europe as well. And as we've already heard, many of the shipping companies, because of the actions of the Houthis, have been forced to divert. That will have an effect on global trade, and that is unacceptable. Freedom of navigation and the ability to conduct global trade are really important for the whole world, of the whole world's security. And so I think that's a key justification. And then we have the direct attacks on various vessels, including the hijacking of a very major ship, the Galaxy Leader, that was captured in November, and the crew have not been released. So the Houthis have basically been building up this level of attacks now for a couple of months. And so we've been quite slow to respond to this, apart from conducting some defensive operations, preventing missiles from actually landing in Israel and others. But the attack last Tuesday, a particularly aggressive attack by the Houthis, I think really was, the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it's also important to say that America and Britain for a while have been warning about this, and I think they could not allow it to pass. I think that's the other side of it. People talk about red lines and people like that, but it is important. If you say this is unacceptable and we're going to do something about it, at some point you have to back those words up with actions, and that's what the UK and the US have done tonight.
We have some significant breaking news just into us, as we have learned now that the US and British military have launched strikes against targets in Yemen. Areas of Yemen controlled by the Houthis. This is according to 2 U.S. officials. This, of course, comes in the wake of those Houthi rebel strikes on ships in the Red Sea, those strikes on commercial ships that we've been talking about now for weeks. It is, of course, the potential for a big escalation of the growing conflict in the Middle East. We've got team coverage tonight. I want to start with Gabe Gutierrez, who is live for us at the White House. Gabe, what do we know, and where does this go?
Oh, well, hi there, Hallie. As you mentioned, 2 sources confirmed to us that the U.S. and British forces have started strikes against Houthi targets inside Yemen. Now, this is an escalation, Hallie. The U.S. had been trying to prevent or had retaliatory strikes against Houthi forces before, but these are the first land-based retaliatory strikes that the U.S. has undergone. Now, they targeted multiple locations inside Yemen with fighter jets and Tomahawks fired from Navy ships. Now, Hallie, this comes after the White House has repeatedly warned the Houthis over the last several weeks to essentially knock it off. Now, none of these warnings had apparently worked. Today, the Iranian Navy seized an oil tanker off the coast of Oman, raising the stakes here. Of course, the Houthis being backed by Iran, according to the National Security Council here. And the U.S. had been considering targeting these land-based positions for some time now. The U.S. and the U.K. had already responded by shooting down missiles and drones fired by the Houthis. The U.S. Navy recently sank Houthi boats that had fired on commercial ships. Now, today, Secretary of State Blinken was in Cairo, and he said, I don't think the conflict is escalating, but there are danger points, according to the Secretary of State. But again, the breaking news there, Hallie, that 2 U.S. officials confirmed to NBC News that the U.S. and British military have launched strikes against the Houthi militant group inside Yemen for the first time, Hallie.
Raf Sanchez, I want to go to you now, live for us in Israel, in Tel Aviv. And Raf, we have talked now for weeks about the potential for a broader regional escalation, particularly after these attacks by Houthis in the Red Sea. We know there have been more than 24 on commercial ships, commercial tankers. This has been an issue that the U.S. and allies around the world have been trying to get a handle on.
This has been an issue for 2 months, Hallie, and the Houthis, week after week, attack after attack, have been defying the U.S., defying America's allies, and continuing these strikes on commercial ships heading through the Red Sea, through that narrow strait called the Bab el-Mandeb. Around 20% of global trade disrupted by these Houthi attacks, according to the U.S. government. You have ships, rather than going through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean, are now taking this very long route around the southern coast of Africa. The Houthi attacks have been driving up the cost of shipping, costs which have been passed on to consumers all over the world. And it has become a situation that has become untenable from the perspective of the White House, from the perspective of the British government. You've heard Secretary Blinken, as he's been here in the region over the last week, saying again and again, there will be consequences if these Houthi attacks continue. And they have continued. Just yesterday, according to the U.S. and British militaries, the Houthis launching their largest, most complex attack yet. 18 drones, 3 missiles fired at ships in the Red Sea, despite those warnings from the U.S., from the U.K. These strikes have been very highly telegraphed, Hallie. The Houthis have known they were coming. They have put out warnings of their own, saying that they will respond to any American attacks, and they have options in terms of targets. Commercial ships in the Red Sea, American bases in the region, but also Saudi Arabia, oil facilities there, which they've targeted many, many times in the past. So we're seeing these American and British strikes coming now. The question is, how will the Houthis respond?
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.